How many of you traveled sometime during this holiday season? Anyone? Yeah. Who went the furthest? Like, who went somewhere really far? I want to hear it. Italy. Anybody beat Italy? That might win. Yeah. We had someone went to Germany last service. It's wild. So yeah, our church, we travel, we get around. Anybody go somewhere really close, like Mesa, you know? No, Chandler, yeah. Yeah, my family and I, we traveled as well. We went to California, a little bit far, not too far. My dad, actually, he just retired after 41 years working for the same company. Pretty impressive stuff. I'm like, wow, nobody does that anymore, right? Like, people hop from one job to the next like nobody's business. And my dad, faithful, steady, just served that same company for 41 years. He just retired. And so we're like, Dad, what do you want to do for your retirement celebration? We got to do something. And he's like, I want to go to Disneyland. We're like, really, Dad? Like, yeah, I want to take the grandkids. I want to get us all, let's go. So I'm like, okay, Dad, let's do it. So we got the family together. Me and I have 3 brothers. One of them couldn't make it, but we all went with our wives and our kids, and we had a great time at Disneyland, hit the theme parks and that kind of thing. It was a good time. But the best part of the whole trip, we just got back, the best part of the whole trip was in between. It wasn't at the theme parks. The best day was the day in between. We took a day off because you need a break after you're walking around for like 20,000 steps. You know what I mean? Like all day on your feet, you're tired, you're sore, everybody's grumpy. We took a day off in between, and we celebrated my dad. We just had a little party for him, and we got him some good food and some cake and some ice cream. And that night, as we were having dinner, we're eating cake and ice cream, celebrating my dad. I just asked everybody at the table. There's this big round table at the place we were staying, and so all 11 of us could sit around it. And I just said, hey, just to honor Dad, like what are some stories? What are some memories you remember of him and just the impression he's left on your life? You know, working for 41 years while he's raising kids. What are some memories? What are some stories? And we started just kind of sharing some funny stuff, right? Like, my dad was terrible at cooking. Awful. Like, he would grill stuff. He didn't cook indoors. He was an outdoor cooker, right? He would cook stuff on the grill, and every single time he would burn the chicken without fail. And he would convince us, I just like it that way. We're like, no, you don't. This charred chicken, you know, just crunching it, you know. And then until eventually one of my sister-in-law came along and actually taught him how to cook outdoors for real. And now he's a really good griller. And so we were talking about that. We were laughing about that kind of stuff. But then we were also just many of us, just tears in our eyes, just telling stories about the impact that he made on our life. My dad was just a godly man. He's a faithful man who, you know, worked for 41 years in the same place, always put God first in his life. Ever since he came to faith in college, just put God first, was always at the weekends serving at the church. He was an elder at my church. He would sing up in the choir and the praise band every week. But he put God first, and then he always put family second. Even though he had to work really, really hard at the place he worked, he would come home for dinner every single night and make sure he spent time with the family before he put the kids to bed. My mom was even telling us stories that I didn't even know about, that when we were little, some days he would have so much going on at work. He'd still come home for dinner. He'd put us all to bed, all the boys to bed, and then he would go back to work and work late into the night. But we didn't even notice it because he made sure that the family was first. It was a priority to him. And some of those things, it just shows the legacy my dad had on me. And I'm part of the man that I am today because of who my dad is. And I know I'm very blessed to have a dad like that. And so as I was thinking about this, it really left me thinking about legacy. What kind of legacy will I leave? I've inherited this legacy from my father. What kind of legacy will I leave for my kids and my grandkids? What kind of legacy will you leave? You know, some of you, you're sitting here thinking about that and you go, well, Brandon, I'm not going to leave a legacy. Like, I'm not important. I don't do anything that matters. Like, my life is boring. You know, and I challenge you, you're wrong on that. Because here's the thing that I know is true is everyone leaves some kind of legacy. Everybody leaves some kind of legacy. The question is what kind of legacy will that be? Some people leave a legacy that is a tremendous blessing to all the people who knew them. Some people leave a legacy that's a curse. Some people leave a legacy that will be remembered for years and years to come. And some people leave a legacy that'll be quickly forgotten. And so the question is not, will you leave a legacy? It is, what kind of legacy will you leave with your one and only life that God has given you? And so that's what a question I want us to think about today. The Bible is filled with different examples of people who left a legacy, and we're still reading about it today. One in particular that I want to look at is in Joshua chapter 4. So if you got a Bible, turn to Joshua chapter 4. There's Bibles in the pews in front of you. We'll put it up on the screen as well. But Joshua chapter 4, here's what's happening as we get into this story, okay? The people of Israel had gone through years of slavery in Egypt. God raises up Moses to lead them out of slavery in Egypt. He brings them to the Red Sea, parts the Red Sea. You probably heard the story. Leads them across the Red Sea to escape slavery in Egypt. And then they're in the wilderness. And the Israelite people in the wilderness made a lot of mistakes. Right? You read the story. They grumbled, they complained, they did a lot of things they shouldn't do. And so God says, okay, you're all going to be stuck here wandering in the wilderness until this generation dies and the next generation comes, and then I'm going to bring them into the promised land, right? And so here we are in Joshua chapter 4. Moses has passed away, and all the people of that generation, except for a few, have passed away. And here's Joshua now leading the nation of Israel to cross the Jordan River into the promised land for the very first time after 40 years of wandering in the desert, right? So picture this, the whole nation lined up on the east side of the Jordan River, and there's a big problem though as they're looking into the promised land on the other side. The river is overflowing, the Bible tells us. There's heavy rains or whatever, and so the river banks are overflowing. The river, it's a big river flowing fiercely, and they're going, there's no way we can cross this river with all these people. And God says, don't worry, I got this, right? If you know the story, God tells Joshua, he's like, look, here's what you're going to do. You're going to get all the priests, and they're going to carry the Ark of the Covenant. You know what I'm talking about? If you've seen Indiana Jones, you got a picture of it, right? This giant golden box, so they kept all the 10 Commandments in and other things, and the priests would carry it with these poles. So get all the priests, pick it up, and I want you to have them march into the river. And all the priests are going, that's a great idea. Let's carry a giant metal box of gold, right? And march into this flowing river. But they are faithful. They do what God asks them to do. And what happens in the story? The second the priest's feet touch the water, God parts the Jordan just like he parted the Red Sea for Moses. He parts the Jordan for Joshua. And the people march across the Jordan River on dry land into the promised land. It's an incredible story. It's an absolute miracle, crazy to even fathom what that would be like. And right in the middle of that, while they're still standing on the riverbed, as the people have crossed over, Joshua takes a moment to leave a legacy for the next generation. And that's what I want to read about today. So Joshua chapter 4, starting in verse 5, Joshua calls 12 men back from the other side of the river to come back to him in the middle of the Jordan, a man from each of the tribes of Israel. And he says this to them in verse 5. It says, and Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. Now notice he says it's a sign and it's a memorial. I'll get back to that in a little bit. But if you jump to verse 20, he keeps going. And then it says, and those 12 stones, which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal, which is an encampment that they had on their way to Jericho on the west side of the river. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? You shall let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over. So that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So in the middle of the river, Joshua says, we can't forget this moment. We got to remember this moment. This is important. We need to make sure our kids don't forget what God did for us right here, right now. So he takes these 12 stones, right, and he sets them up for the people to remember. The whole point of setting up these 12 stones was so that the children would see it. And they'd look at it, and there's no plaque, or there's no inscription, there's no story. They just see this big pile of rocks. And they go, what's that all about? And that would be a cue and an opportunity for the parents to tell their children, this is what God has done for his people. This is how great our God is. And they could pass it on from one generation to the next and the next. Pretty awesome stuff. And notice it said in there in verse 7, he says it's a memorial. And then in verse 6, he said it was a sign. And this is, I think, important for us to understand. In verse 7, when he's saying it's a memorial, he means it's a memorial of what God has done in the past. So when you look at these stones, it's a reminder of what God did, how he was faithful to his people, how he rescued them from slavery, how he helped them cross over into the promised land. But then if you notice earlier, he said it's also a sign. That means a sign for what's to come, for who God is and for what God will continue to do, how he'll continue to be faithful for not just now, but forever. Look at verse 24. He doesn't just say God was mighty. He said that this is so that all the people will know that the Lord is mighty, presently, now, and today, and forevermore. So that the people forever would know God is mighty, he has the power to save, and that he will continue to do so. And we just need to fear him with a reverent awe and respect for how powerful and mighty and great our God is forever. So you see what he's doing here? He's setting up this legacy. This is the legacy of Joshua. He set up these 12 stones. And I made this picture of these 12 stones. This is my artistic rendering. My daughter said they look like pills. I was like, what kind of drug addict are you? They're river rocks. They're smooth, right? I had to get that in there because she was giving me a hard time over it. But this is part of Joshua's legacy. These 12 stones that were set up as this memorial, as this sign of things to come, this memorial of the past, as Joshua led the nation of Israel to become God's people and to set up this new nation who would follow God. And if you know the story of the Israelites, right? Didn't always follow God perfectly, did they? As the people strayed, this was something that would hopefully be a memorial, something that would call them back to remember where they had come from and who God is and how faithful he's been. And as they repented and they followed him and went through difficulties and wars and all sorts of hardships and difficult times, it was also a sign to remember God's faithfulness and his power to save and to rescue and his promise to keep his holy people to be his. It was a pretty cool thing. And notice that Joshua didn't build this monument to himself. It was like, these are the stones of Joshua, right? He didn't say that. He didn't do it to Moses either. He built a memorial and a monument to God. And that is what I hope that our legacy will be like. Not about us, but about God. Not a legacy or a monument to me, but to our Lord, our Savior. That's what a true lasting legacy is built on. It's not about us. It's about the greatest legacies are the ones that are not about the person who did it, but about what the person has done for others, right? How much they served others. Jesus even said, the greatest of you will be your servant. It's not just the person who's the most important, it's the person who serves the most, the person who serves the Lord most first and foremost. But that's not what we think about often when we think about legacy, is it? When we think about legacy, if you think about what a legacy is, a lot of us, what we think about is maybe somebody who, like, you had a lot of money and you donate to something, and so you donate and maybe they put your name on a building, right? And that's your legacy. Look at that building named after me. Or you do something so great that they make a statue of you, right? You do something so great, they write about you in the history books because of how great your life was, how great a person you were. Or maybe it's you had so much money or some great inheritance that you leave for your children or your children's children someday, and that's your legacy. And all these things, like nothing bad about any one of those necessarily, but I would say that none of them are the best. Those can all be good, those can all be great, but not necessarily the best legacy. Proverbs even says this, Proverbs 13:22. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. So it's not necessarily bad to leave an inheritance to your kids. It's actually a good thing. If you have the means, if you have the wealth to leave an inheritance to future generations, go for it. That can be a wonderful blessing. But that's not the most important thing. It's not just about the physical things that we leave behind. It's not just about the stuff we leave. More importantly is the spiritual legacy that we leave behind. What's the legacy of faith that we leave behind? That's what's truly going to last. Don't waste your life building a legacy for yourself. I mean, how sad a life is that? Look at the statue I built of me, Brandon, Isn't that great? I mean, I'm going to set it up so everyone can just be in awe of how great I am. What a sad life. Because here's the thing, all these physical things, they're gonna waste away eventually. Whatever legacies we live for our life eventually will probably be forgotten. Very few of us will be written about in the history books. I hate to break it to you. So what kind of legacy are you building? Is it one that's going to last or one that's going to just eventually be forgotten? Look what Jesus said in Matthew 6, verse 19. Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy or where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus is saying, don't lay up earthly treasures. Lay up spiritual treasures. Build a legacy of faith and of spiritual things, not necessarily of physical wealth and riches. What are you living for? So if you get nothing else, I hope you understand this today. Spiritual legacy is greater than a physical legacy. Your spiritual legacy, your legacy of faith is greater than the stuff you leave behind. Can we agree on that today? The kind of faith that you pass down, the kind of influence that you have on other people's lives around you, the impact you make on their lives, that is what's going to last for eternity. Because the only thing that lasts forever is God and our souls, right? And so the impact you make on human souls, that's going to go far longer and last far greater than the stuff we leave behind. And that's what Jesus is saying. Look, moth and rust is going to destroy this. No matter what you build up here on earth, it's all going to go eventually. Not all of us are going to have the financial means to leave behind some kind of inheritance or some kind of great legacy to other people, but every single one of us will leave a spiritual legacy of one kind or another. Every single one of us will have some legacy of faith. It might be they had tremendous faith. It might be they had no faith. But every single one of us is leaving some legacy of the faith that we have, is rubbing off on the people around us in some way. So the question is not, will you do that? But the question is, what will it be? What will be your spiritual legacy? What kind of legacy are you leaving behind? A great example of this kind of spiritual legacy that I'm talking about is found in 2 Timothy. Paul's writing to his young disciple, Timothy, and he's talking about his faith. And look at the chain of this legacy chain of faith that we see here. Here's what Paul says to Timothy. He says, I thank God whom I serve as did my ancestors. So here's Paul saying, it's not just me. I inherited this legacy of faith from my ancestors who served the Lord. They served the Lord. They passed it down to me, and now I'm serving the Lord. Paul didn't always serve God perfectly, but he always served God passionately, didn't he? And that was the legacy of his faith passed on to him that he inherited. He's the recipient of that because of his ancestors. And then he says, with a clear conscience, as I remember you constantly in my prayers day and night, or night and day, as I remember your tears, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. And then he says this, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well. So here's what Paul's saying to Timothy, right? I had a faith that is received. I'm blessed to have ancestors who passed the faith down to me that taught me about the ways of the Lord so I would follow him faithfully. And then he looks at Timothy and you think he'd be like, Timothy, and now you have a faith passed on for me, Paul, the apostle, right? You could think he could be that way, right? Like imagine your mentor is Paul, the guy who wrote a bunch of books in the Bible, right? Like you think that he would take credit for Timothy's faith, but he doesn't. He looks at Timothy's honest. He's like, look, it's not, your faith wasn't inherited from me. It didn't start with me. It started with your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. Like it was passed down from one to the next and then to you. And because of their faith, now you have faith. And Timothy was blessed to be mentored by Paul and to be discipled by Paul, to be encouraged and coached and trained by him. But he inherited his faith from his grandmother and from his mother. And that's pretty impressive and awesome to think about, right? These are the spiritual things, that the spiritual legacy of their parents and their ancestors. And, it's not only just a legacy we pass on to our biological children, though. It's also a legacy we pass on to our spiritual children, people who are children of the faith that we help encourage and lead. So look at this. The Apostle John says this in 3 John verse 4. Here's what John writes. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than hearing my children are walking in the truth. He's not talking about his biological children there. What John's talking about is his spiritual children, his children in the faith, the people that he has helped lead to Christ, or the people he has helped pastor and minister to, the people he has helped disciple. And there's no greater joy that John has than hearing that they are continuing to be faithful and walking in the truth, walking with the Lord. That's John's joy, that his spiritual children would continue to carry on this legacy of faith that he received from Jesus and then passed on to them. Pretty awesome stuff. And that is the kind of legacy that we're talking about. How are we not just passing on faith to our children, but to spiritual children, to other people, to help other people walk with the Lord as well? You know, looking back at Joshua, these 12 stones he set up, these physical stones, the Bible in the New Testament then kind of transitions. It's not just about these physical rocks and these physical monuments that we set up. In the New Testament, it starts speaking about rocks again, but it starts talking them in a different way. It starts talking about these spiritual stones, these spiritual rocks. And much like Joshua set up these physical stones that eventually would wear away, in the New Testament, we have these spiritual stones that are set up that will last forever. And Jesus is the greatest of them all. He's the cornerstone. Look at this, 1 Peter chapter 2, starting in verse 4. Peter writes this, as you come to him, meaning Jesus, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. You yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, not to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So the honor is for you who believe, but for those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumble because they disobey the word as they were destined to do. And then he continues in verse 9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Beloved, I urged you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. So here's what this is saying, right? In the Old Testament, we had these physical stones, these rocks that were built as monuments and memorials and this kind of thing. But in the New Testament, saying Christ is building something different. It's not just some physical building. It's not just some physical temple. It is now a spiritual house. And he, Jesus, is the cornerstone. The cornerstone was the first stone that is set. It's the most important stone. Why? Because the first stone you lay down determines the orientation and the direction of every other stone around it, right? Every other stone is based off of that stone. That's Jesus. He is our foundation, right? And he's setting up this spiritual house, his cathedral, his church, his people, built with each stone, which is each of us a living stone, a spiritual stone in that sense, building the kingdom of God. Each one of us as believers are part of his church. And that's what Jesus is building. And that's what we are a part of here. If you're a believer today, you are part of God's church. And the only thing that's going to last forever is the Lord in our souls. And the best thing that we can do to invest in eternity is building God's spiritual house, building up his church of all the believers from all time who will one day be worshiping with the Lord for eternity in heaven. That's what I want to build my life on. That's the only kind of legacy that will last. Why? Because I did some research and I was looking, like, okay, these stones that Joshua set up, are they still there? As far as I can tell, they're not. As far as I can tell, no one knows. Like over some thousands of years, who knows what happened to these rocks? They moved, sand covered them. Who knows what happened to them? People might have knocked them over. Like physical things, they don't last, do they? Just like what Jesus was talking about. Like you ever go somewhere super, super old? Like not even like here in the United States where some things are somewhat old, but you go to like Europe or you go to like other ancient civilizations that have been around for a lot longer, and they've got these buildings that have just been standing for centuries. It's just amazing to look at, maybe 1,000 years even. You ever go somewhere there? And one thing you'll notice, a common theme, is almost all of them, all these buildings and all these historical sites, almost all of them are under renovation of some level or another, aren't they? Because they have to constantly work to restore them and to keep them up. Otherwise, what would happen? Over time, weather and the sun and erosion and tourists walking around stomping their feet eventually causes it all to erode and to wear away. And these buildings would completely decay and turn to dust like everything else if they weren't kept up. And that is the physical things of this world, isn't it? Eventually, everything fades, everything rusts, everything goes away. And the only thing that will last is the spiritual legacies we leave behind, the spiritual things that we do for Christ. In my office, I've got these two posters that are on my back wall. My wife got them to me for Father's Day because it's a quote. It's these two posters of a quote that I love. It's by this old British missionary. His name is C.T. Studd. What a cool name, right? What a stud. He really was. And this guy is this old British missionary. He was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he wrote this poem that's super powerful. There's one line in it that repeats over and over again. And here's what he said. And you can kind of see the pictures. But here's what the quote is. Here's what he wrote. C.T. Studd said, "Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last." Only one life 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And that is so true. And any time I see those posters, I try to remember, like, that's what I want my life to be about, right? My life's going to be dead, gone soon. Like, life is a vapor. It's a mist. You don't know how much time you have left in your life, right? We only got one life to live that God has given us. Let's make the most of it. It's going to be over before we know it. And what's going to make our lives count? What's going to make our lives matter? What is going to last beyond our lives? Only Jesus. Only what we do for him. And so it's a reminder to me not to build a monument to Brandon, right? But to build a monument for Christ, to build his spiritual kingdom, to build his heavenly temple. You know, that just kind of leaves us with this question, right? What legacy will you leave? What legacy will I leave? I really want to challenge us to think about that. You know, we do a lot of funerals here at this church, and you hear some of the stories every time everybody gets together and they gather around and they talk, about the person's life, and you hear some great stories about people's lives. And some stories are just inspiring. You hear some stories, and then other times you hear people, they get together and they talk about somebody who's passed, and it's really kind of sad sometimes. Because, you get a lot of people together and they talk about what this person's life meant to them. And a lot of it's like, man, that guy, he just loved fishing. He caught fish. He loved it. And there's nothing wrong with fishing, but like that's it. All the time on earth, you fished. Okay, like I hope there's more, right? Like he loved to golf. Man, we enjoyed golfing. And again, nothing wrong with golf. I got nothing against golf. I'm terrible at it, but that's besides the point. But is that it? Like, she loved to cook. She could cook so well. And that's a great thing. I love to eat good cooking. But is that it, right? My hope would be that as we, if you could get the people around you, if you could hear what people would say at your funeral, that they wouldn't just say these mundane, things that are just kind of superficial, but they would say something that matters more, that we would be a people who, they'd say, yeah, that person loved fishing. But when we're out fishing, they always talk to me about Jesus, and they taught me so much about the Lord. Or that person loved golfing, but as we were golfing, they were always talking to me about their faith and how God had made a difference to them, and they made a big impact on my life. And I'm going to miss those rounds of golf, hearing about them, not just because of the golfing, but because of who they were, right? And the impact they left in my life spiritually. Or I loved their cooking, but man, every time I went to her house to cook, she used the food to get us in the door, but then she prayed with us, and then she invited us all to church, right? Whatever it is, right? I hope that the legacy we leave is more than just the physical things, but the spiritual legacies that we pass on as well. What does this look like? How do we do this? Our church, we have this new mission statement we rolled out last year that our church, we're about making disciples who love God, love people, and love the Bible. We want to make disciples, help people follow Jesus, help people follow Jesus who grow in their love for the Lord and their love for people who the Lord loves and their love for the Bible, the Lord's word, right? God's word. That's what we want to be all about. Making disciples who love God, love people, and love the Bible. So if you want to start leaving a legacy, this is a great place to start. How are you making disciples? How are you loving God? How are you at loving people? How are you doing in loving His word? Do you know it? Think of it this way, like you got to be a disciple before you can make a disciple. Imagine it like this. Imagine I grab one of you and I take you outside of the parking lot out here. And I see this brand new, like red Corvette. And I'm like, you see this Corvette? I'm giving it to you. It's my legacy to you. And you go, wow, I can't believe you're giving me your Corvette. And I go, no, it's not mine. That's Bob's over here, But I want you to have it. You don't look at me like, what are you talking about, Brandon? Because I can't do that. It's not mine, right? And the same way, if you want to make disciples, you can't give away what you don't have. You can't make others disciples if you're not one yourself. You can't pass on a faith that you don't possess yourself. So it starts with that, right? If you don't have faith, maybe today's the day that you put your faith and your trust in Jesus for the very first time, and we welcome you into His kingdom, right? If you do have faith and you've been following the Lord for a while, but man, you've really been drifting and you haven't really been into it, and you really feel like, man, maybe this year is the year that I need to start turning things around, then start there. Get in, come to church regularly. Get in a Bible study so you can grow in your love for His word. Start praying more. Talk to somebody here in this church. We'd love to get you involved. We'd love to get you connected, to start serving, to start doing something for the Lord. Like, let's make this year the year that we start doing this. We start finding people to make disciples, to invite people to church. Like, let's leave a spiritual legacy here with the one and only life that God's given us. Let's be a church that's all about that. So I just want to leave one more thought too is, you saw those fences coming in on the way in, right? Like tomorrow we're knocking down the D and the E buildings. It's going to be awesome. I hope to see it, right? I wanted them to give me a sledgehammer or a wrecking ball, but apparently that's like a liability and it'd be a problem. So they're not going to let me. But what we're doing here is we're not just building buildings, because again, building buildings, eventually buildings fade and over time, but what we're doing is we are creating a legacy here at this church. We are building for the future, a place where people can come every single week and hear the word of God preached, a place where people can gather on Sundays after church to have a coffee and a donut for the glory of God, to make other friends, to get plugged into the church, and people who can meet throughout the week for Bible studies and other things that we're going to be doing as we're passing the faith on and teaching other people to follow Jesus, as we're making disciples. And this is an opportunity that we have right now. Many of us, we came to this church and we didn't build this place. I didn't build this church, but now here we're building and making something for that's going to be last beyond us, even in the future, and bless future generations. So you got an opportunity to give your time to serve, but also give above your normal offerings to help be part of this legacy of building this building that's going to be a light for Christ in this city for years to come. So that's just one more way that we are making a difference and that you can be part of the legacy of faith that we're leaving behind.
Hey, thanks again for watching, and thank you for helping us reach so many people for God's kingdom in 2024. We have an exciting year already planned out for 2025, and we can't wait to share it with you. So be sure to do all those YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, so that you never miss a video and help us reach more people. Next week, you're going to want to check out live at az.church. We have a brand new sermon series called Blueprint. Also, did you know we have a podcast? You can watch all the podcast episodes right here. And if you want to see another great message from Pastor Brandon, watch this video next. We'll see you next week.